Over there is a memorial to today's forgotten hero. Hundreds of people come into this little park every day, yet I bet that not 1 in 1,000 knows who is remembered there. You'll be surprised to know that this person was one of our heroes and nobody remembers him. He left school a failure, but he went into this building here as an MP, and while there, he changed the world. His name, Thomas Fowell Buxton. Thomas Fowell Buxton was born in 1786, and his father died when he was 6 years old, so he was brought up by his mother, who was a Quaker, and it was she who first introduced him to the idea that slavery was wrong. At the age of 15, he left school because he did not succeed there, but he made friends with a boy called Joseph John Gurney, and he invited him to stay with his large family in Norwich for a few months after he left school. The Gurney family were Quakers, and something about the way of life led at their home brought out the latent giftings of Buxton. He received a stimulus there, not just by studying with the children, but he learnt new disciplines to do with study, such as setting himself goals and striving to be a better person. The atmosphere in the Gurney's home had a real effect on Buxton. He went from there to Trinity Dublin, where he became top of the class. And he worked hard in order to please the Gurney family, especially one member, Hannah, who he loved and later married. Love can be quite a strong motivator. Buxton was not the only one to benefit from the atmosphere at the Gurney home. That family produced several amazing men and women. Elizabeth, who became Elizabeth Fry, helped reform the prisons, not only in this country but also in Europe. Samuel became the leading financier of his day. He was extremely wealthy, and he knew that God owned all his money, and he gave away millions. There were 2 more reformers. There was a philanthropist. There was a leading educationalist. All of them were used by God to benefit mankind. Buxton was so brilliant at university that they asked him to become their MP. This was an extraordinary compliment because he was a foreigner, he had no money, and he had no influence. But he turned them down, and instead he went into the family brewing business. When he was 27, he became born again after a life-threatening illness. In 1815, the Napoleonic Wars ended, leaving this nation's economy in a mess. Buxton paid a visit at that time to Spitalfields, and he was shocked at the number of starving people that he came across. He did a public speech on the subject, and he received a congratulatory letter from Wilberforce, saying that he hoped that one day they'd be working together in Parliament. Now listen to this. Buxton prayed incessantly for God to use him as his instrument to spread his kingdom and use him to benefit mankind. Isn't that amazing? God certainly answered his prayer. In 1818, Buxton was elected to Parliament at the age of 32. He began by championing prison reform, and then he got involved with changing the penal system. At the time, there were 230 crimes which would be punished with the death penalty. After a speech on the subject, he received another letter from Wilberforce asking him to join him in the fight against slavery. Wilberforce acknowledged that he was getting older, and he realized that he would not be able to see the fight through to the end. So he asked Buxton for help. Buxton wasn't sure, but on speaking to his sister-in-law Priscilla, who was a Quaker minister, he decided to get involved. Having a passion for the poor, Buxton worked tirelessly for 11 years to try and achieve freedom for the slaves. And then in 1833, the government announced the end of slavery in Britain. They gave £20 million to slave owners to compensate them for the loss of their slaves, although the official valuation was only £5 million. This shows how the government valued the freedom of these poor people. In the 11 years that Buxton had left to him, he largely spent the time fighting for the rights of the natives in the colonies and trying to prove the potential of Africa through the cultivation of the land and through education. He worked tirelessly for poor Africa, resulting in illness and his death in 1845 at the age of 58. Amazingly, 50,000 people, mainly ex-slaves, contributed to a statue of him that is in Westminster Abbey, close by that of William Wilberforce. One of Buxton's secretaries said, "The qualities that struck me most about Sir Fowell Buxton were his perseverance, his benevolence, his disregard for outward appearances, his devotion to everything that is practical, and perhaps above all, his humility. The love that he showed his staff, the villagers, his family, friends, and strangers was unconditional and constant. He was an example to every Christian." Dr. Guthrie, who was the leading minister of his day in Scotland, wrote this: "I have been reading Fowell Buxton's life of late, a most interesting narrative of one of the noblest specimens of human nature and divine grace that the world ever saw. What an amazing testimony. I wish somebody would write something like that about me when I'm gone." It is appalling that this great man has been forgotten by history. We must remember our heroes. We must tell people about their lives. This man was a failure at school, and yet he was a hero of this nation. There is no reason why you cannot be a hero as well. Pray like Buxton incessantly for God to use you to be his instrument to change this nation.